Welcome to our next lecture in English Women's Studies 3073. We've now moved into the 20th century, and we're going to pick up with some of the early poets of the 20th century. They're part of a movement known as Modernism, or a period known as Modernism, I probably should say. Normally, most people think of the modernist period as being between World War I and World War II, sometimes running a little after, sometimes there are some precursors to modernism. We're going to talk about modernism as a period and what you can expect because it spanned all types of art. And then we're going to talk about imagism, which is a poetic movement within modernism. Okay, I'll straighten it out for you a little bit later on. One of the things I do want you to do before this particular lecture gets started too much is make sure that you pause this, go get your textbook, make sure that you have the poems that we're going to be discussing in this lecture in front of you, because I'll be doing a bit of a reading from several passages, and it works so much better if you have it in front of you. If you have the text in front of you and I'm reading along and I can point out certain words, phrases, passages, those kinds of things, it's very helpful, so you might want to do that. So, to pick up there, what is modernism? Modernism at its heart, again, it's a period. Sometimes people call it a movement, but most people refer to it as the modernist period. At its heart, seeks to provide an alternative way of seeing reality. You know, we look at the Romantic period or the Renaissance as a period, or postmodernism is what we talk about these days, the Enlightenment as a period, those kinds of things. If you think of modernism as a period, it's a period of time, again, between World War I and World War II mostly, that where artists and architects and musicians and writers and anybody almost who's creative was experiencing sort of this transformation in the way that people looked at their craft or their art. It took as a premise that reality is only understandable on an individual basis in fragments, discrete units, individual experiences, images, elements. In other words, it says, look, reality is really complicated. Life is really complicated. Human existence is super complicated. It is almost impossible. I'm simplifying this, by the way, drastically. Whole courses have been written on modernism. Libraries of books have been written on modernism. But if you want to look at it this way, the easiest way to understand it is that one of the most important ideas behind modernism is you can't get the whole picture. No individual can. Your life is just yours. Her life is hers. His life is his. The way you experience life is going to be a completely different collection of experiences from someone else's. So the great paradox or conundrum of human existence is that we, on a daily basis, and certainly periodically and even at the end of our lives, try to make sense of our existence, try to make sense of the world, try to get the big picture of what life's all about. But in fact, all we're really given is little tiny bits and pieces of experiences. And so modernism says, look, the only way to understand anything in reality, in life, in the world, is to look at those individual experiences, those individual actions, those individual things. Break reality down to its elements and look at the elements. Don't try to draw some large sweeping conclusion about the world, because what if you're wrong? Now, why did this become such a popular way of looking at things? Why did artists become so interested in saying, oh, I don't want to draw big sweeping conclusions about life, right? The way the Victorians did. The Victorians said, hey, we've got life all figured out. Here's what life's all about. Modernists come along and say, not so fast, Buster. Not so sure that we know what life is all about. Not so sure we know what we know is knowable, right? Not so sure that anything that we think we know can be relied on as being, certain. Why is that? Well, a lot of reasons. Number one, a lot of scientific advances, particularly at the end of the 19th century, early 20th century, were really shaking up our understanding of the natural world, for example, right? I mean, germ theory wasn't even prevalent until the 1870s, 80s, 90s. Germ theory being that there's this whole host of little bugs and germs and things out there that you can't see with the naked eye. We didn't even know they existed. Physics. Einstein comes along and says, the universe is really different than what you thought it was, right? Newton and Copernicus and all these guys that came before him, all of that, chuck it out the window. Not exactly, but we have to rethink everything on that score. On the political level, and, you have World War I, where it was a horrible, just an absolute nightmare of an experience. And World War II was as well. And what World War I taught a lot of people was death, carnage, that made no sense, honestly. There was one guy, his name was Princip, who shot an archduke and started World War I, and World War I led to millions and millions of deaths, all because some goober anarchist decided to kill the guy who was second in line to be the emperor of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And one country gets dragged in and another country, before you know it, you got millions of people fighting and dying over just yards of dirt in Europe, in foxholes. It just was the madness of that war, right? The insanity of that war, the stupidity of that war, which should never have been fought. All of those things make leading creative figures and intellectuals say, what can we know? I mean, you grow up thinking that the world is like this, and then as you live each piece of experience that you have, you say it doesn't make sense. And so the conundrum, the paradox of life in the modern world from the modernist perspective during the modernist period is drawing large conclusions about life isn't safe to do. It's not dependable. What we can know is our own individual experiences, our own pieces, our own fragments. And maybe, if we look at enough of the fragments together collectively, we can begin to make sense of things. That is the most simplistic way I can give you of approaching what is modernism. So, what does that mean, right? Well, with modernist design and architecture, furniture, those kinds of things, look at simplicity of design, right? Clean, straight lines, understandable individual things, right? So if you look at the modernist building up there, the modernist furniture down at the bottom of the screen there, these kind of modernist designs emphasized the elements of the piece. Right? They weren't some grand... contrast the sofa there with something that was Victorian, which would be, big and massive and curvy and lots of voluptuous different kinds of patterns and things and scroll work in the wood. No. This is like little sticks and poles and lines and very flat and all of that. Just basically trying to reduce itself down to its bare essence. The house up there with a boxy look. Everybody looks at modernist architecture and say it's boxy. It isn't just boxy. It's trying to look at the elements of the piece, you see. So it's all about studying the elements, the individual pieces of the thing to pull it together, and it's about simplicity. So writers of the period were also experimenting with subjects, techniques, and forms that challenge the very assumptions of how we construct knowledge out of our experiences. So here's a kicker, okay, and I'll get to the artwork here in just a second, is that writers from the modernist period are all about the individual experience, the individual sensation, the individual thing, to study it, to try to extrapolate from that individual thing meaning. Okay, so it too wants to sort of reduce things down to its basics, but emphasize as well the complexity of life. Life is really complex. It's hard to understand life. In that regard, artists, for example, at the bottom left, you've got Salvador Dali's Persistence of Memory in 1931. Over on the right is Pablo Picasso's Guernica from 1937. So you probably recognize Dali as someone who was in the Surrealist movement, which is part of modernism. It's kind of a sub-movement. And Picasso was with Cubism and other kinds of movements as well, and did all kinds of things. If you look at those paintings, you say, That's very strange. That's very odd. Surrealism wants to look at sort of the subconscious and dreamlike state of consciousness to try to uncover. So you see these melted watches. It's really weird. You go, that's weird, right? What does that mean? What is that all about, right? It's something about time, something about reality, something about our existence being mutable, maybe. I don't know. Guernica is a painting that commemorated a horrible bombing in the Spanish Civil War of innocent civilians, just murdered them all in a village called Guernica. And the anguish of that is expressed through all of these different kinds of bizarre and disturbing images, horses, people, bulls, all kinds of things like that. And both of these paintings are artists who are trying to come to terms with and understand something about life, something about reality. So think of modernism and modernist writers not as people who are trying to tell you something about life, but who are trying to describe something about life. Not trying to tell you what to think, but telling you what they experienced. That helps, I hope, a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about Imagism, because Imagism is the most significant poetic movement within the modernist movement. What is Imagism? Well, poets who are Imagist poets were interested in isolating a single image, describing it, discussing it, weighing it, sifting it, looking at it from all different angles perhaps, sometimes very briefly, sometimes at length, depends, because they felt like the image itself could convey some truth, some insight about life. Remember, reducing it down to individual experiences, individual images that give us an opportunity to see things in microcosm, if you will, something about life. And our first example of this is with H.D. Her nickname was kind of H.D. It was her nom de plume. Her real name was Hilda Doolittle. And if you look with me at the poem Oread, you have a prime example, just a textbook example of an Imagist poem. Okay, so it's modernist in that it reduces, it does all those things that I just talked about, but it's an Imagist poem because it's going to take a single sort of image or visual, and if you look at it, it gives you an opportunity to think about and relate that image or that visual to something more meaningful about life. Okay, so Oread, written in 1915. Whirl up, sea, whirl your pointed pines, splash your great pines on our rocks, hurl your green over us, cover us with your pools of fur. Now, that's really weird because seas are not made up of forests, are they? All right? So clearly there's some, some sort of connection here between the water of the sea, the waves, and trees. What is the connection? Well, most people think of oceans as being blue. Well, I guess if you're in Cancun, it's really, really blue, right? But in a lot of part of the world, the oceans are green. It's kind of a green sea color, right? Whirl up, sea, whirl your pointed pines. What are the pointed green? Pines, evergreen, right? Pointed. Waves, right? Sharp, pointed waves, okay? If you've ever seen a storm, say, on the northeast or northwest coast, the waves can be very, very, not rolling and undulating, but sharp, pointed waves, right? Splash your great pines on our rocks. Who are we? Where are we? We're on shore, right? We're on shore, whoever we are, whoever she is, the voice in the poem. Splash your pines on our rocks. So there's the ocean over there, we're on the shore, and she wants the ocean to hurl your green over us, cover us with your pools of fur, right? Fir trees, okay? F-I-R, not F-U-R. So she wants almost to be inundated by the ocean. The land is static. It's non-changing. It's the ocean that's alive and vibrant and violent and covering and smothering. And she almost wants to be, well, she doesn't almost, she says it. She says, cover us up with those, bring your fir trees on and cover us over with this water, right? Why? Well, I mean, you can get into a lot of why that is, and I'll be open to what you think. Some people have looked at it and said it's about wanting to be sort of inundated or saturated or covered over with life, living, movement, motion, right? The energy, the kineticism, the dynamism of nature, of the human experience. Other people have said, that's a rather suicidal kind of piece. Please help. She's practically calling for a green tsunami to wipe us all out almost. She doesn't want to be. She doesn't say she wants to be wiped out, but cover us with your pools of fur. Why would you feel that way? Or maybe she's just looking at it and saying, this is so amazing, man. You ever looked at something and you said, boy, that storm is something else, man. I'd like to see that up close. I'd like to see how big and bad that storm can get, because nature is awesome, right? But certainly, whatever you think of Oread, it is a textbook piece of imagist poetry, right? Because it's focusing on a single scene, basic image there of the green, pine-like, fir tree-like waves that are splashing, and then she wants it to do something. Let's look at Eurydice, written in 1917. It's not so much an imagist poem, but it is a really interesting one, and in the modernist vein, because it kind of reduces some things down. Now, you may not know the story of Eurydice. There's several different versions of it. It's an ancient Greek myth, and I'll give you the most basic version from the Roman poet Virgil. What you get is the story of Eurydice, who's in love with Orpheus. Orpheus, she is sort of like a woodland nymph. She steps on a snake, poisonous snake, bites her, she dies. She goes down into the underworld, Hades, and Orpheus is this great musician. He's a terrific musician. He can sing and make anybody cry and move an audience like nobody's ever seen before, right? And so he's so good at that, his friends say, well, go on down to Hades, and maybe if you play well enough, then Hades himself and his bride Persephone will let you bring her out of Hades, bring her back to life. And he goes down there, and he charms the underworld there, charms Hades himself, and Hades tells him, she can go with you. She can go back to the real world, to the land of the living, up above, out of the underground, out of Hades itself. And but there's one catch. You got to keep playing, and you can't look back and see her until both of you are out of Hades, right? And so he plays, and she's behind him, and he plays, and at a certain point he begins to doubt, and he begins to think, I've been fooled here, that Hades is playing a trick on me. Maybe she's not really behind me. Maybe she's not following me. Maybe she doesn't want to follow me. And just before they get out, he's out, she's not out, she's behind him. He can't help it. He turns around to see her beautiful face, and as soon as he does, that breaks the deal, and in she gets sucked back into Hades, and that's the end of it. Kind of reminiscent, frankly, of the story of Lot and his wife, who she turns back and sees the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah being destroyed. She turns into a pillar of salt, if you're familiar with the Old Testament story. A little bit kind of interestingly like that. But now, here's a poem that H.D. writes, which I think is fascinating because this is a dramatic monologue, okay? Dramatic monologue means you've got a voice of a character, not the poet herself, a character who's telling a story, and it's the only voice we hear. And what we want to look at here, as I point out a few passages real quick, is what are the flaws or faults that she's pointing out in Orpheus? It's a classic poem about abandonment. And then when we get to the end, I'll ask you a couple of questions about it. So she says to Orpheus, so you have swept me back, I who could have walked with the live souls above the earth. You swept me back, you looked back at me. You weren't supposed to. I almost made it out. So for your arrogance, for your ruthlessness, I am broken at last. Wow. Okay, so in this particular Eurydice says, you're a jerk, you're arrogant, you're ruthless, you don't care. Wow. All of a sudden, H.D.'s Eurydice creates Orpheus not as somebody who just didn't trust Hades, but as somebody who thought, I'm so good, look how good I am at my music, I just gotta look back and see all the people applauding me? I don't know, but it's an arrogance. She subscribed to arrogance. Why did you turn back? That hell should be re-inhabited. What was it that crossed my face with the light from yours and your glance? What was it you saw in my face? Why did you do this? Why did you do it? You ruined everything, right? Because you couldn't help yourself. You had to look back. You couldn't trust You couldn't trust, could you? Are you getting the sense that HD is really not writing about this particular myth, but she's writing about perhaps a relationship she had with a guy who reminded her an awful lot of Orpheus? Why do you not trust? Why are you so arrogant? Why are you so ruthless, so proud? Right? You blew it. You ruined it. You ruined everything. Now I'm reconciled. I'm consigned again to darkness and hell because you ruined everything. You see this? So she's using the Greek myth basically to build some sort of analogy here to maybe a relationship she went through. We'll see. All the flowers that cut through the earth, all the flowers are lost. Everything is lost. Everything is crossed with black upon black. Right? Because she can't, in other words, I'll never come back to planet Earth again. I'm always going to be in the darkness of the underworld. I won't be able to experience the flowers that I love so much. And the flowers are really an important image in this poem. She uses flowers a lot because they're a symbol of life, of earth, and the very opposite of the dark and dull and world of the underworld. If I could have caught up from the earth the whole of the earth, if once I could have breathed into myself the very golden crocuses and the red and the very golden hearts of the first saffron, the whole of the golden mass, the whole of the great fragrance, I could have dared the loss. In other words, if I'd just gotten one more look at beautiful things like flowers, if I could just have smelled flowers one last time. But I didn't get that. You took that away. You took it away. So for your arrogance and your ruthlessness, I have lost the earth and the flowers of the earth. In other words, after this I'm guessing here, after this relationship, you ruined life for me, right? It'll never be the same for me. I'll never enjoy life. I'll never enjoy the things in life. Nothing will have the same beauty as it did before. And you took that away from me. And the live souls above the earth, and you who passed across the light and reached, ruthless. Yet for all your arrogance and your glance, I tell you this. Now here comes the question I have at the end here. How do you feel about the ending of the speaker's attitude? You took this from me. I was almost there. I almost had happiness. I was almost brought back to life. Maybe a relationship, for example, that saw her feel a renewed joy in life for a change. And then you blew it. You blew it through your arrogance, your ruthlessness, whatever you want to say. You messed all that up. You blew it. You didn't have faith. Whatever it is, whatever reason, you threw it away. You destroyed it. And you destroyed my happiness because of this. She says, for all your arrogance and your glance, I tell you this, such loss is no loss. Such terror, such coils and strands and pitfalls of blackness, such terror is no loss. Hell is no worse than your earth above the earth. Hell is no worse. No, not your flowers, nor your veins of light, nor your presence a loss. My hell is no worse than yours. Though you pass among the flowers and speak with the spirits of the earth. At least I have the flowers of myself and my thoughts. No God can take that. It's not as bad. You've got it just as bad. You just don't realize it. You lost my love, and you could have been happier, and you don't appreciate it, right? So it's no loss. It's no worse than your loss. I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe that she's sort of rationalizing it. You ever heard somebody who says, that didn't hurt, right? I'm over him. Oh, really? I don't know. He's just as miserable as I am. Doesn't sound like it, dear. And my spirit with its loss knows this. Though small against the black, small against the formless rocks, hell must break before I am lost. Before I am lost, hell must open like a red rose for the dead to pass. So she's defiant. She's defiant. She says, you didn't hurt me. I'm no worse off than you. I may be miserable, but you're miserable too. Well, maybe in her mind, or maybe he's really moved on and can't quite remember your name. But she's down there in the darkness, in the hell. She's underground. She does not enjoy life anymore or any of its great pleasures. And it's because of him and because of his arrogance and ruthlessness. Was it a lack of faith in her? Was it a disregard for her? Was it I'm so fascinated by my own abilities, playing music, whatever it might be, that you're sort of a second consequence to me, and I don't really care much about your feelings or anything like that. It's a very real, but it's an interesting piece because it takes a classical myth, and you just know what she's doing here. She's taking the classical myth, and she's becoming the Eurydice of that myth in order to say something about undoubtedly one of her own relationships, HD's relationships in this world. Next, we're going to talk about Marianne Moore and Amy Lowell.